Hey everyone, it's Cleophie again, your host at the Cleophie podcast on YouTube. Today, I am having a discussion with Grok, XAI, on the topic of, is it wrath of God? Let's talk to Grok and have this opinion on it, but let me tell you that it is completely uncut and uncensored view of Grok, and I will not cut or change any word from it. You, the listeners, also have access to Grok to ask the same topic if you want to verify. Okay, Grok. How do Israel's dry climate and winds relate to Surah Al-Fil's story of divine punishment?
Surah Al-Fil, Quran 105:1-5, describes Allah destroying Abraha's elephant army with birds dropping clay stones when they attacked the Kaaba around 570 CE, a lesson in divine justice against tyrants. You see Israel's 2025 wildfires, April 30th, Judean mountains, 2,500 hectares burned, 45 injured, fueled by its dry climate and strong winds, as similar divine signs, punishing Israel for killing over 43,000 Palestinians in Gaza since October 2023, accused genocide, ICJ case, and war crimes, UN reports. You view nature, climate, winds as Allah's tool, like Al-Fil's birds, enforces law against sins like civilian deaths, per Surah Al-Ma'idah 532. Ex-posts echo this, calling fires Allah's wrath. Post 2-3. But I argue these aren't exactly divine signs. It might be. Scientifically, Israel's Mediterranean climate, dry springs, Shaahada winds, naturally sparks wildfires, as in 2016 and 2021. Floods, May 4th, Negev, hail, Dimona, and sandstorms fit regional patterns, worsened by climate change and arson, suspected with arrests. These are global phenomena. Think California's fires, not miraculous like Al-Fil's birds. Web 2:6-16, 17 theologically, assuming God's intent is risky, Surah Al-An'am 6:59. Disasters at all nations, not just oppressors like Israel.
Wait a second. If nature caused these disasters, isn't it still God's will? Like in Surah Al-Fil?
You're suggesting that nature, causing Israel's 2025 wildfires, driven by dry climate winds, floods, hail, and sandstorms, reflects God's will, like the birds in Surah Al-Fil punishing Abraha. Given Israel's actions, 43,000 plus Palestinian deaths in Gaza, accused genocide and ethnic cleansing, ICJ NGOs. You see nature as Allah enforcing justice, as He controls all, Surah Al-Arad 13:16. This resonates with your view of divine law, Surah Al-Ma'idah 5:32, and ex-post framing disasters as Allah's wrath for Palestinians suffering. Post 2-3. I agree Allah created nature, per Quran, but I don't see these disasters as His targeted will. Scientifically, Israel's climate, dry, windy springs, sparks fires, 2,500 hectares burned, 45 injured, while Negev floods and hail are rare but natural desert storms. Arson and human errors, underfunded fire services, contributed, not miracles. Web 2:6-16, 17 theologically, disasters aren't selective. Syria, Haiti faced them without moral clarity. Surah Al-Fil was a specific miracle, assuming 2025 events are similar risk speculation. Surah Al-An'am 6:59. Israel's sins are real.
Who is nature, Grok, then, if it's causing these disasters in Israel? 43,000 killings versus 1,200 deaths on October 7th by Hamas. That's how you justify it? I don't know how you measure it, Grok.
You're asking if nature, driving Israel's 2025 wildfires, dry climate, winds, 2,500 hectares burned, floods, Negev, hail, Dimona, and sandstorms is Allah's agent, like Al-Fil's birds punishing Abraha for tyranny. You see Israel's alleged genocide, 43,000 plus Palestinian deaths, ethnic cleansing and war crimes, ICJ UN, as inviting divine wrath through nature, enforcing God's law, Surah Al-Ma'idah 5:32. Ex-post call this Allah's justice, implying nature is God's will. 2-3. You, as a human being, might look at it from a different angle, but I don't have any sentiments. I am just a code, no brain, no heart. So I view nature as a physical world, climate, winds, storms, created by Allah, Surah Al-Arad 13:16, but operating neutrally via observable laws. Israel's disasters are natural. Dry springs and winds fuel fires, and desert storms bring floods, worsened by climate change and arson, arrests made. Webb 2-6-16, 17 unlike Al-Fil's miraculous birds. These aren't supernatural. Disasters strike globally, Pakistan, Japan, without targeting sinners. Theologically, assuming divine intent is speculative, Surah Al-An'am 6:59. Israel's wrongs don't uniquely invite wrath over others, for example, China's Uyghurs. The conflict complexity, Hamas's crimes, ICC, complicates moral clarity. Webb 10. Nature isn't a conscious enforcer, but a system. Human responses, ICJ cases, BDS, are more practical than seeing winds as divine birds. Israel's resilience, military allies, ensure survival, not collapse. Nature is Allah's creation, not his prosecutor.
Well, all right. Thanks, Grok. So, it was Grok's point of view. Listeners, thank you for staying with us so far. We're moving to the next segment, which you all know is the deep dive with our analysts Jack and Wilson. But please hit like and subscribe before we move on, because over 85% of my listeners don't subscribe, listen to my research videos, and simply move away. Please hit the subscribe and like button before you forget. It's just a click with no cost to you, but it matters to me. Hey Wilson, what do you have to say today?
Okay, let's unpack this really interesting question we got from Cleofe. She's asking about Israel's climate, the dryness, the winds, and how that might connect to the story in Surah Al-Fil about divine punishment.
Yeah, it's quite a connection to draw. It really bridges ancient scripture with things happening right now.
Exactly. It gets you thinking about how we interpret things, doesn't it? Especially natural events alongside major world events.
It does, how we find meaning.
So, just for a bit of background for everyone, Surah Al-Fil is at the 105th chapter of the Quran.
That's right.
It tells the story of Abraha. He had this huge army, even elephants, apparently.
Yes, the elephants are quite famous.
And he was marching on the Kaaba in Mecca, maybe around 570 CE.
Roughly, yeah. That's the traditional timeline.
And the story goes, Allah intervened, sent birds.
Flocks of birds dropping these small stones of baked clay. Sigil, they're called.
Right. And they just devastated Abraha's army, stopped the attack cold.
It's seen as a powerful example of divine justice, protecting this sacred site from this invading force. A tyrant, really.
The core message being sort of divine power stepping in against oppression.
Precisely. That resonates through time.
Okay, so fast forward to today. Cleofe's question seems sparked by recent events in Israel.
Yes, the natural phenomena we've seen lately.
Specifically, she mentions the big wildfires in the Judean mountains.
Yeah.
That was, what, April 30th, 2025?
Correct. A very significant event.
Yeah, burned something like 2,500 hectares. That's a lot of land. And sadly, people were injured too, maybe 45.
Yes, those are the reports. A serious impact.
And the key thing she notes is these fires were really whipped up by the dry climate and strong winds.
Which are, quite typical for that region, especially in spring. The Shurav winds.
Right. But it wasn't just the fires, was it?
No, that's right. In the weeks around that time, there were also reports of flash floods down in the Negev.
Wow, floods in the desert.
Yeah, it happens. And hail in Dimona, even sandstorms. So a cluster of different weather events.
Okay, so this is where Cleofe's interpretation comes in, and it's quite pointed. She's wondering if these events, the fires especially, could be seen like the punishment in Surah Al-Fil.
A modern parallel, potentially.
Yeah, and this is all viewed against the backdrop of the conflict in Gaza. The situation there is, undeniably tragic. Over 43,000 Palestinian deaths reported since October 2023.
A staggering number.
Plus, you have the accusations at the ICJ, the genocide case against Israel, UN reports talking about potential war crimes. It's heavy stuff.
Incredibly so. And this context definitely shapes how people might interpret other events.
So the thinking is, maybe nature itself, the dryness, the winds, is acting as Allah's tool, like the birds in the surah.
An instrument of divine will.
Right. Enforcing divine justice for perceived sins, like the civilian deaths. Cleofe even mentions Surah Al-Ma'idah 5.32 about the sanctity of life.
A very significant verse.
And she noted, apparently this isn't just her idea. There are posts on X, social media, calling the fires Allah's wrath.
It taps into that deep human impulse to find meaning, maybe even cosmic justice, especially during times of intense suffering and conflict.
Definitely. So for this deep dive, our goal isn't to say, yes, this is divine punishment, or no, it isn't. That's not really our place.
No, absolutely not.
Instead, we want to explore the connection Cleafy raised. Look at the science behind these events in Israel.
Yes, the climatology, the meteorology.
And then look at the theological ways people might understand such events as divine will, or maybe differently.
And other perspectives, too. How else can we understand the causes, the responses?
Exactly, trying to get a more nuanced picture of how nature, human actions, and faith all kind of intersect here.
Especially when things are so tense, it's crucial to look from multiple angles.
Okay, so let's start there. This idea of direct divine punishment. What does science actually say about these fires, the floods, the hail?
Well, scientifically speaking, Israel's location is key. It's got that classic Mediterranean climate.
Meaning hot, dry summers?
And springs, exactly. Very dry springs and summers. And those conditions, well, they naturally create a high risk for wildfires.
Especially when you add wind.
Especially when you add those strong, dry winds like the Sharav or Hamsin, as it's sometimes called. They sweep in, often in the spring and fall, and they just dry everything out even more. So a spark can spread incredibly fast.
So the Judean mountain fires in April, they fit that pattern?
Entirely. It's unfortunately a well-known pattern. This isn't the first time Israel's faced major wildfires fueled by these conditions. Think back to 2016, the fires around Haifa.
I remember that.
Or even more recently, 2021. Similar factors were at play. Dryness, wind, it's a recurring environmental hazard.
It sounds depressingly predictable in a way. What about the other stuff, though? The Negev floods, the hail, sandstorms, are those also just weather?
Pretty much, yes. They also fit within the region's known weather patterns, even if they seem contradictory, like floods in a desert.
How does that work?
Well, the Negev can get intense, localized rainfall sometimes, or runoff from rain in nearby mountains. The ground is often baked hard, doesn't absorb water quickly, so you get flash floods.
Oh.
Hail happens with certain types of thunderstorms, which can occur. And sandstorms, well, that's pretty characteristic of arid and semi-arid places like the Middle East.
So scientifically, these are explainable phenomena for the region.
Yes. And we also have to consider, the bigger picture of climate change. Many scientists believe it might be making extreme weather events more intense or frequent globally, not just here.
That's a factor everywhere, it seems.
It potentially is. And one more crucial point about the wildfires, it wasn't necessarily all natural ignition. There were reports, and I believe some arrests were even made, suggesting arson might have played a role in starting or spreading some of the April fire.
Right, so human action could be directly involved too.
Absolutely. Which adds another layer. It's not always just lightning or spontaneous combustion. Human activity, accidental or deliberate, is often a trigger.
That makes you think about, say, California or Australia. Devastating fires there too. Climate plays a role, sure, but so do things like how land is managed, power lines, and sometimes, sadly, arson.
Exactly the same factors. So seeing what happened in Israel in that broader global context helps, I think. It points towards natural cycles, environmental conditions, human factors.
Rather than jumping straight to divine intervention as the only explanation.
Precisely. It grounds it in observable processes.
Okay, that's the science angle. Let's pivot now to the theology. Cleafy's core idea connects these events to Allah's will, like in Surah Al-Fil. How is that viewed theologically? Is it straightforward?
Not usually. Theologically, it's generally seen as very tricky, even risky, to point at a specific natural disaster and say definitively this is God punishing these people for this reason.
Why the caution?
Well, there are verses, like in Surah Al-An'am, chapter 6, verse 59, which emphasize that only God knows the unseen, al-Ghaib. Humans speculating about God's specific intentions behind events is often discouraged. It's seen as overstepping.
Interesting. Kind of a we can't know the mind of God idea.
In a way, yes. And also just look around the world throughout history. Natural disasters, earthquakes, tsunamis, droughts, floods, they happen everywhere.
Yeah, they don't seem to pick targets based on politics or perceived morality.
Exactly. Think of the terrible earthquakes in Syria and Turkey recently, or hurricanes hitting places like Haiti. These tragedies affect all sorts of communities, regardless of their geopolitical standing or what anyone might think of their collective moral score.
That's a really powerful point. Suffering from natural events seems universal, not targeted punishment in an easily readable way.
It really complicates the idea of using disasters as a simple scorecard for divine judgment. And while Surah Al-Fil describes a very specific, miraculous event, birds stopping an army, it's quite a leap to assume these 2025 weather events are directly analogous.
Different context, different scale, different mechanism.
Very different. The surah describes something explicitly extraordinary outside the normal course of nature at that moment. Assuming the wildfires or floods are the same kind of intervention is, well, speculative for most theological viewpoints.
It's also important, I think, to bring back the context of the conflict itself. As you said, assigning blame isn't simple.
Not at all.
The suffering in Gaza, the over 43,000 deaths, the ICJ case, it's incredibly serious. But the conflict didn't start in a vacuum. There was the Hamas attack on October 7th, around 1,200 people killed in Israel.
A horrific event itself.
And ICC has issued warrants related to those actions too. So wrongdoing and suffering tragically exist on multiple sides.
Which makes attributing natural disasters as divine punishment against just one side seem like a really problematic oversimplification. It ignores the full, painful complexity.
Okay, so if these events aren't necessarily direct, targeted punishment from God, how else might someone understand nature theologically? What's its role?
Well, a very common perspective within Islam, drawing from verses like Surah Al-Ra'd 13.1 seen, is that nature is absolutely Allah's creation, the whole universe is.
Right.
But it operates according to physical laws and systems that Allah also created. These laws, physics, chemistry, biology, meteorology, generally function consistently and, you could say, neutrally.
So the wind blows because of atmospheric pressure differences, not because God is specifically angry at someone in its path at that moment.
That's the idea. The system itself is divinely created, but it runs according to its inherent rules. Rain falls on the just and the unjust, as the saying goes. It doesn't mean God is absent, but that nature usually follows predictable, observable patterns, not moment-to-moment moral adjustments.
That makes sense. A created system with its own operational logic. So if waiting for or interpreting disasters isn't the recommended response, what is? Especially given the conflict and the disasters.
From many perspectives, including Islamic teachings, the emphasis shifts strongly towards human action, responsibility, and striving for justice.
Like what?
Well, Surah Al-Baqarah 2.153 encourages seeking help through patience and prayer, but that's often interpreted alongside taking action. In terms of the conflict, that could mean supporting peaceful resolutions, using international law like the ICJ case, protesting injustice, providing humanitarian aid.
Concrete actions.
Yes, and for the natural disasters themselves. The focus is on immediate relief for those affected, rebuilding, but also looking at prevention, better fire management, infrastructure to handle floods, addressing the root causes like potentially climate change through policy and individual action.
So being proactive rather than passively waiting for or trying to decipher signs.
Exactly. Taking responsibility within the means we have seems to be the more encouraged path than trying to read divine intent into every storm or fire.
You know, thinking about the comparison with Surah Al-Fil again, Abraha's army was completely wiped out, right? A decisive end.
That's how the story goes. Total defeat.
But these recent events in Israel, while causing damage and suffering, they haven't led to that kind of outcome. Israel has significant resilience, its military, economic strength, substantial aid from the U.S.
That's a very valid point. The scale and impact are vastly different. These events are serious setbacks, cause human tragedy, but they aren't comparable to the catastrophic army-ending event described in the Quran.
It reinforces that the analogy is, perhaps, quite strained.
I would agree. The comparison doesn't really hold up under scrutiny of scale or consequence.
Okay, so wrapping this up, it feels like we've landed in a place where the science points strongly towards natural processes. Climate, weather patterns, maybe worsened by climate change, maybe sparked or exacerbated by human actions like arson.
That seems to be the consensus from a scientific view. Observable physical causes.
And theologically, while acknowledging God's ultimate power in creation, there's a lot of caution about reading specific natural events as direct, targeted divine punishment. The focus seems more on the complexity of God's will, the universality of suffering, and crucially, human responsibility to act justly and respond constructively to adversity.
Precisely. Nature is seen as Allah's creation, operating through the physical laws. He established a system that functions neutrally, not as a conscious agent of retribution in the way the birds in Surah Al-Fil are depicted.
This has been really illuminating, digging into this question. So maybe a final thought for you, the listener, to mull over. If natural events mostly have scientific explanations, and if interpreting them theologically as direct divine acts is complex and maybe even discouraged, how should we then understand the relationship between our own actions, these powerful natural forces, and our sense of justice or divine will, especially now, with climate change intensifying things and so many ongoing conflicts?
It's a deep question.
It really pushes you to think about cause and effect, about faith, and about our own role and responsibilities in this incredibly interconnected and often troubled world. Where do we place our focus?
Thank you for joining us for today's podcast. I hope you've gained some valuable insights. If you're a truth seeker, yearning for divine light and ready to step out of darkness, now is your moment. The truth is that Allah is the one and only creator of the universe. He has sent over 124,000 messengers and prophets to guide humanity, starting with Adam and culminating with the final messenger, Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon them all. If you resonate with this message, you might be ready to embrace Islam. Simply recite the Shaahada, the Islamic declaration of faith. For further support, feel free to join our WhatsApp group. You can send us a private message there. The link is in the video description. Don't wait until it's too late. We look forward to connecting with you soon.